Have you ever reconnected with an old friend and felt like there was so much to share, but not enough time to say it all? So you end up being selective and intentional, squeezing in the stories that matter most? That's exactly how I felt recently when I met up with a dear friend I hadn't seen in years. Because in the end, that's what communication is really about: reconnecting, sharing life changing moments, and catching up on the past. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I'm Azimah, and in today's episode, I'll be sharing that experience with you. So let's begin.
Hi everyone, we're the Shirfa sisters from Malaysia. Azimah, Amna, and me, Aisha, hosts of the My English Matters podcast. After spending 8 years in the UK as children, we know the importance of mastering a second language, so we created myenglishmatters.com as a platform to help second language learners learn to speak, write, and communicate in English with confidence through our online courses, classes, and workshops. To join our free course called Speaking with Confidence and get the latest updates about our programs, subscribe to our email list at myenglishmatters.com. And now, without further ado, let's get started.
Last month, my high school friend Raheela visited me. She came with her husband and their 14-year-old daughter. Although they currently live in Bulgaria, they often return to Manchester where her family lives. So to get to Kuantan, where I live, they took the coach from KL. Now, do you know what a coach is? It's a large, comfy bus used for long distance travel. Now, I hadn't heard that word in a while because here in Malaysia, we usually just call it a bus. Anyway, when we finally met, it was outside a Middle Eastern restaurant. And as soon as we saw each other, we hugged and laughed. Gosh, it felt like no time had passed at all. But what stood out to me right away was Raheela's melodious voice and her Mancunian accent. That's the distinct way people from Manchester speak. So Mancunian, Mancunian, Mancunian is what we call people or things from Manchester, a city in the north of England. I told her right there and then, gosh, I miss that accent. It had been more than 20 years since we last met. We sat down, we ordered rice, kebabs, and hummus. My husband and hers hit it off. I mean, they bonded over their love for cats. After our meal, we brought them back to our house for a short visit, then dropped them off at their hotel. A couple of days later, Raheela and I met again, this time for coffee and a long, heartfelt chat. We talked about life, family, personal struggles, and even tragedies. Now, I've always loved a good story and listening to them. Raheela's storytelling style was sequential, meaning she told things in the order they happened. It was deep and emotional, while mine tends to be shorter. So I normally pick out the key scenes to focus on when I tell my stories. But that actually made me reflect on how everyone has their own way of expressing themselves. And that's beautiful. I told you I love listening to stories. They tell you so much about a person, what they've been through, and even how they communicate. Raheela also shared that she's now a licensed counselor and she'll be starting a new project with a charity group, counseling Muslim youths in the UK over the phone. What I found interesting is that her work is all about listening, really listening, and guiding people to reflect and find their own solutions. So she shared with me a simple habit she uses during calls: writing down key points so she doesn't forget anything important. And I thought to myself, wow, that's such a simple yet powerful habit. So here's a question for you, dear listeners. How often do we really listen when someone is speaking to us? And how often do we miss important details, missing the chance to connect or even help someone have a breakthrough? Now, as we were talking, Raheela spoke with a strong accent, right? I told you before. And she had a louder voice than what we're used to here in Malaysia. So I actually asked her, do you change the way you speak when you're in Bulgaria? And she told me yes. And she said that her priority is to speak clearly to people around her. But of course, when she's back in Manchester, she goes back to her usual accent and rhythm. And I love that because this shows how flexible we can be as speakers. And you know what? Without even realizing it, I began to match the way she spoke too. Isn't it funny how we naturally adapt based on who we're with? Have you ever noticed yourself doing that? Anyway, while she was here, I also became her translator. She needed help renting a car over the phone, and I helped her communicate with a local rental agent. That little experience reminded me how useful it is to know more than one language, especially when you're helping others. So, what's the point of this story? Giving support, translating for a friend, or simply catching up over coffee? All of these moments show how good communication brings people closer. It helps us understand one another, and the more aware we are of how we speak and listen, the better our conversations can be. So, before I end, here are a few things I'd love for you to take away. Your accent is a part of who you are, it's something to be proud of. But if you ever feel like people are struggling to understand you, focus on speaking clearly. That might mean slowing down just a little or putting a bit more emphasis on certain words to help get your message across. And let's not forget, listening is just as powerful as speaking. If you are the quiet type, you don't really like to talk that much, know that your role as a good listener is just as important. Don't tune out when people are speaking. Be genuinely curious and ask meaningful questions. If you are truly listening to the person speaking, you'll naturally have questions to ask. But don't forget to contribute too. Share a little about yourself, whatever you're comfortable with. That's how real connection happens. Okay, listeners, if you would like to review some of the vocabulary I've mentioned, like coach, counselor, and Mancunian, you can check out the vocabulary guide on our website at myenglishmatters.com. To our Muslim listeners, Ramadan Kareem. My birthday happened to fall on the first day of Ramadan this year, on the 2nd of March. You know what? Spending time with Raheela made me feel like I was 20 years younger and back in high school again. Thanks for listening. Until our next episode. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the My English Matters podcast. Please make sure to click the subscribe button if you haven't yet and leave a review of this podcast if you like it. If you'd like to learn even more with us, we have a free training called Speaking with Confidence where we send 7 tips to your email. You'll also get weekly emails with tips and lessons to help you improve your English. Join us at myenglishmatters.com.